I can't really see this though.
Okay.
Hi guys, we're live.
Hi.
We're live. So congratulations to Crystal Cook. You were the winner for our fact and fiction. Thank you for playing, everybody. We really appreciate that. We had a good time with this contest because we kind of tackled some of the facts and fictions that we hear in our training and that we hear day to day. And we thought it would be a good time to kind of address them. So on top of that, what we decided to do was to give you guys a brief webinar about fact or fiction and go through each one individually so you can understand why it was a fact or fiction if you weren't sure. So yeah,
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Do we want to begin?
so yeah, we do have it in the background here, but I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see it. I'm gonna have to kind of like slide over for it.
And I'm just going to open up the Google Plus community. So if you have any comments that you want to write in underneath the link to this webinar, we'll try to answer questions as we go.
Yeah, and feel free to comment here as well. We can see your comments there too.
Okay. So I'm going to start us off with the first one. The first fact or fiction was ABA is a therapy used only with children diagnosed with autism. So this is a fiction. No, that's not true. The bulk of the research over the last 60 years or so is in fact with students with autism. However, I would say the last 15 to 20 years, the research has really blown up in so many different areas. What's really fascinating is the Behavior Analytics Certification Board, the BACB, just posted this beautiful link to a whole bunch of different sort of mini presentations by different BCBAs or different professionals in the field that kind of give you an overview of how ABA is used in gerontology and pediatrics and education. And a variety of different diagnoses. So that's a really cool link. And actually, I think we'll share that on the Google Plus if it's not already shared.
Yeah, let's do that for sure.
Because it really kind of dives into the research and where we've been and where we're going, where we're at with different fields of study and how it relates to ABA. Organizational behavior management, for example, is when I was just doing some videos on that last night, talking about how we influence behavior of workers in an organization and how leadership can impact those behaviors. So that was really interesting. And there is a video on that on the BACB link as well, kind of diving into what research shows.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, all that being said, no, we don't simply use it for children with autism. Although, if you do have a child who's attending a private organization and they are receiving some ABA or some IBI, yes, that is under the influence of ABA, and all those strategies are what is gearing that therapy. However, it's not simply for children with autism.
Yeah, I think what happens is because of the development, because of the history of ABA used primarily with students with autism or children with autism and developmental delays, that's where the misconceptions has come from. But what we know about ABA is that it's a complete framework. It's an actual science. So, and we've talked a lot about in our training sessions, is following that whole wheel. So if you look at the whole wheel, starting with just identifying what is the target behavior to going all the way around the wheel to, what are some of the strategies we're going to put in place. It makes sense that this isn't only just for kids with autism, because it's a way of just assessing what the behavior is and really determining the function and then what strategies we can put in place. And those strategies aren't autism specific strategies. They're just good strategies in that we will go back to the literature. And this is the big thing, is that everything in ABA is evidence-based. We always talk about that a lot. So if we're working with a student that has ADHD, for example, or something unique to their background history, the first thing we're going to do is go to the research and see what is evidence-based for that student based on their diagnosis or circumstances.
And a good point to mention too is because ABA is an inductive science. We gather all of our data and then we come to a hypothesis and then we intervene, as opposed to the other way around, coming up with a hypothesis and then trying to prove it. Because we're so inductive, what often happens is if someone on the team, either the school team or the parent team, want to try something that we don't have evidence for, we're okay with that as long as we can track the data to show is it impacting the behavior. So it's not to say that we will discount a strategy. If somebody wants to try one, we are usually pretty okay with that as long as it falls within sort of ethical boundaries. But we do take pretty rigorous data to prove, in fact, is this strategy working for this student or is it not? So that's usually our approach if we can't find research or it hasn't been published enough yet or something, then we will use the framework of ABA to test that intervention as opposed to just using it without any kind of measure of its success.
That's right, because the cornerstone, the hallmark of our discipline is making database decisions. So even if we're trying something maybe unique that someone else has recommended, we want to collect data because if it's working for that student, then we're going to keep going with that. So we call that single subject design. So we're just basically comparing a student against themselves and making sure that they're actually making progress once we put an intervention in place. But data kind of drives our every decision that we make.
And you'll notice that most of our research in ABA is single subject design because each individual program is geared for an individual person. So no two children have the same, psychological assessment. No two children have the same intellectual capabilities or skill deficits. So we're always going to gear the program individualized to them. So that's why the research is basically single subjects. Mm-hmm. Yep. Is that what you're going to say too?
Yeah, that's what I was like, that right there. There you go. And we're all matching again.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one is all behavior can change. So the answer to that is a fact. So there are some kind of limitations to this statement, and it is that we believe all behavior can change when it is under the right condition, with the right stimulus present, the right reinforcement present, and when everybody's kind of on the same team, applying every strategy together. There are conditions where obviously behavior won't change, and those conditions would be where if a child is unable to perform a skill. We are always looking at socially significant skills and skills that we would target for that individual child. Not every child that we work with is always going to learn how to do math, is always going to learn how to write, is always going to learn how to read. But there are skills that are appropriate for that child that we will change or influence based on the A's and C's that we put in place. So there are conditions where, even me, for example, I probably won't learn, an advanced astronomy at this point in my life, but I could be influenced under the right conditions to perform some of the skills to lead towards that. And that's what we're always looking for.
Yeah, because every skill, no matter how large, and every behavior, no matter how sort of far from where they're at now, does have precursor skills and precepts that can be taught. So that's kind of what we do, what we sort of specialize in ABA, is finding the prerequisite skills and teaching to those, even if we know certain environmental factors or different contingencies are in place that will prevent us from teaching the eventual goal. So that can be things like a student has a very ingrained learned history, and we can't influence parents continuing to reinforce that learned history at home. We know that we can change their behavior to some extent at school. Will that transfer to home? We just don't know without being able to effectively change all of the environmental conditions that student is in. But we do know we can change their behavior while they're at school. So that's an example of sometimes what we hear often is like, well, we can't change their behavior because parents aren't on board, or we can't change their behavior because he's 20 years old and the learned history is just too strong. So those are some of the things, I think, the underlying myths that we wanted to sort of target with this one, is that people feel behavior can't change for those reasons.
Yeah. So sometimes you may not get to the terminal goal that, I don't know, an example would be, reading fluently at a grade 12 level, but there's lots of prerequisite skills that we can definitely break down, and you nailed it on the head. ABA is really taking that terminal goal, that end goal, and thinking, what are all the steps we need to teach in order to get there? And that's what ABA is. It's putting in strategies and principles and to teach all the prerequisites.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Next.
So next one is relationship building is a key component of applied behavior analysis. And it's a fact. It's a fact.
It's a fact. It's such a fact.
We do care.
For some reason, well, not for some reason, we know why. Applied behavior analysis has a bit of a reputation of being a really kind of cold and discipline. And I think that stems back from, the 1960s when behavior modification was occurring, which was very punishment based. And we weren't as concerned with socially significant behavior at that time. So we got a really bad reputation, and some of it was for good reason, because a lot of things happened back then that we would now recognize that aren't ethically prudent to do. But we strongly believe, and it's woven within our applied behavior analysis literature, that relationship building, especially with our client and in the school system with the student, is key. So we know that, we call it pairing. So sometimes you hear us talking about pairing instead of relationship building, but to us it means the same thing. So we know that if we want our student to make good progress, we have to have a good relationship with that student, or we're not going to make good progress with them. Even if the student has a lower IQ or has a lot of adaptive skill impairments within their adaptive skills, we still know that we need to have a good relationship with that student. So in the school, that means that students' teachers or educational assistants and principals need to have that good relationship, and there needs to be a bit of that mutual respect. So one of the first things that we talk about, and a part of our assessment, is a preference assessment. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what is that student like? And then usually I come in with Disneyland to just pair with the student so that I can be seen as the giver of good things. So when I come in the room, Johnny's not running away from me to the other corner. He's going to stick with me because I have a lot of great things within my bag. So now I can start teaching him, because he knows I'm going to be rewarding him for all that hard work I'm going to be asking him to do.
Yeah, and exactly what Becky just said. So often I'll say someone is paired with you when they're running towards you and not running away from you. So if the child is running away from you on a constant basis, then pairing would be where we're back at.
Yeah.
There's some really great research by Robert Schramm. He works on the 7 steps to instructional control, but he also does a lot of amazing research on pairing. So he works a lot with younger students. Not that pairing is not appropriate with everyone. But he works a lot on the idea of, before you can actually have that relationship where you can deliver instruction and they will comply with that, you have to have the instruction or the relationship where they believe that the reinforcement will come. And sometimes that happens at the beginning, where they're kind of like that mistrust. I'm not really sure if you're going to deliver what you say. So we have to prove to them that what we mean, we say as well, which also means if we say we're going to give you something, we are in fact going to give you that. We never want to break that trust. And so often what happens is when a relationship has become unpaired, is there's been a break in the trust somehow, and it's not always on purpose. So the other thing to note for pairing is that we pair a lot and often, multiple times a day, and we pair at the beginning of every session or day or whatever you want to say you're starting your time with them, because it's an ongoing thing. It's not something we do once and then we drop off. So my relationship with Becky and Jen, we're paired because I might bring them a coffee every time, or I might say, hey, do you want to drive somewhere? We continue to pair in our relationships as adults, so we would continue to pair in our relationships with our students as well.
The underlying sort of philosophical underpinnings, I guess, of pairing is that you have 2 stimuli. One would be a highly preferred and one would be a neutral. And you want to bring the value of that neutral stimuli up. So we have to pair those things together so that when the brain sees the neutral, it actually sees the highly preferred. So an example of that in a classroom is, if your students learned history is that 5 times out of 10 times the student approaches me to redirect me or to coach me or give me some direction, and the other 5 times it's just to walk by and say, hey, you're so awesome, and then keep on walking. The brain is saying there's a 50-50 chance when you come near me that there's a reinforcement tied to it or paired with it, and there's a 50-50 chance that there's a redirection paired with it. And so behavior works under the contingencies that we've taught. All behavior is learned behavior. So if your student is coming, if that's their learned history, is that it's a 50-50 chance, you're going to have a higher likelihood of problem behavior before you've even said something. So this oftentimes happens when educators say, he has a reaction or he has a precursor behavior before I've even said anything, before I've even done anything. And that really speaks to that learner's history with reinforcement, with you specifically, and with people that you represent. So different adults, for example. So we would say you have to shift that. So, 8 out of 10 times you have to go over there paired with reinforcement, and maybe only 2 times go over with a redirection or a coaching statement. So we go through this, I think, pretty extensively when we're in training with lots of examples and things like that. But it is important to realize that you can make a neutral stimulus or even an aversive stimulus well paired with the right reinforcement. So you can change the value of different things for sure. You can make a kid that hates math love math, for example.
Yeah. This is, I think, a main topic or main example in training.
Yeah.
Or a kid that does not like you. And so sometimes when I'm working, not doing specific training, but when I'm coaching a behavior support plan that I've written, and I know that the student and one of the educators are not well paired, I recommend taking some of that class time and even just going, so doing a preferred activity with them, because that has to be where you start in order to make progress. So you might as well put the time in up front versus trying to implement a plan that's never going to go anywhere until you have that trust.
Yeah, I think this myth about ABA not really valuing relationships or focusing on relationship building partly comes from the fact that in the consequence column after a challenging behavior is often when we say, please stop trying to build a relationship. Because, good.
Yeah.
So we'll jump to that now then. Okay, so here's our next fact or fiction. There you go. Immediately after the student engages in challenging behavior, you should pair or build a relationship with the student. So this one was interesting, I found on the Google Plus, because there were a lot of facts and a lot of fictions written down. So it is in fact fiction. So this is like I was just saying in the last thing. See, we think along the same lines that I was going there. The important thing here is, yes, of course, we know relationship building is important, but we don't want a student, for example, to only ever have a really great opportunity to build a relationship after a huge problem behavior, because what happens there is we inadvertently develop a behavior chain. Mm-hmm. How do I get the best, juiciest attention and feels from somebody? It's after I have a huge blow up, and we don't want our students to learn that that's how they have to get there. We want it at first to be delivered non-contingently. So regardless, buddy, I really like you, and we hang out, and we're well paired. And after a big challenging behavior, we need to react appropriately based on the function of that behavior, as opposed to just focusing on building the relationship. So there is, I think, a relationship there in terms of how, our bad rap came to be about how we don't like relationship building. So we definitely do value relationships, but we definitely want to make sure it's not happening in the C column after huge challenging behavior.
This is an antecedent strategy, and as we say in our training, antecedent strategies stay in the A column, and our consequence strategies stay in the C column. And so we want to make sure that this one stays in the A column. So of course, after a big blow up or something that's happened, we do want to repair. It's just not immediately after that problem behavior. We want to move on with our day, go ahead on what's happening, and then later come back to it as an antecedent so that it doesn't happen for us.
And just a note on the antecedent part, because I think it's important to show that we do value relationships, and with our students, is that the majority of our plan should be antecedent strategies. And a whole component of that is making sure that student stays going well, putting in lots of reinforcements, working with the educators within that building, doing, preferred activities. So we're trying to prevent problem behavior. So we don't want to see things in the C column as much. So really that juicy relationship building is all part of our antecedent strategies.
And this is why when we do the level 2 training, how to reduce challenging behavior, we dive so heavily in what are the evidence-based practices to change behavior in the antecedent column, and what are the evidence-based practices to change behavior in the consequence column, because we want you to be preventing it as much as humanly possible so that you don't have to be faced with, or now there's been a big blow up, now what do we do? Mm-hmm. However, of course, that is part of the equation when that does happen. But yeah, so the level 2 kind of explores that at length, which is great. Yeah. Okay, next one.
Okay, so if you are not taking data, you are not doing ABA.
Ooh, this one also was juicy, I found in the comments.
Fact,
Yay.
absolutely. So our whole science is based on the fact that it's evidence-based. The reason we know it's evidence-based is because someone at some point has taken data to prove that this worked or did not work. So what we do is we take that same data to prove that our strategies that we've put in place are effective for that child. Because as you'll learn in level 2, we do have a lot of antecedent strategies for different functions. And so based on that specific situation, are we using the correct antecedent strategy? And if so, our data will show that it's working. Not only do we take data, but we graph our data. And the reason we graph it is so that we can visually inspect whether it's working. So for example, just looking at the data, it might be difficult to see, but then when you graph it, you're like, oh, look at that, how pretty it's going down. So we visually inspect all of our data. What we always want to see is when we have a down, that we also have an up. So what we want to see is the behavior that we've targeted for decrease go down, but we are always going to replace that with a behavior that's going to go up. So that's our real main goal, is seeing that skill acquisition go up so that this one just goes down naturally because of that. So our main goal is going to be showing the skills that we've taught over time using that data. So yes, if we're not using data, we don't really, we could be using some strategies that are used in ABA, but we're not using the full cycle of ABA. We really want to get away from just using one strategy here, one strategy there, or calling ABA kind of a tool, which we'll tell you whether that's fiction or fact later, but using it as a whole science. So if we're not using that whole wheel, we show you guys the whole process that we go through. Data is definitely on that wheel. So if we're not doing that, then we're not truly doing ABA.
And the key there too is evidence-based practice is only good if it's used in an evidence-based way. So just because, something like a visual schedule, yes, it's an evidence-based practice, but only when taught and used in an evidence-based way. So just putting it on the wall and showing it to your student is not necessarily going to impact their behavior, change their behavior, we don't know what the function of that behavior was yet. So there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen before that would be put in place in order for it to be used in an evidence-based way. And how would we know? Well, we would have to take data to see, is this working? And remember, what was our goal, right? And are we achieving that goal, or at least getting closer to that goal by using this intervention? So that's the key. There's a lot of evidence-based strategies already being used to change behavior, but they're not being used in an evidence-based way. So that's the key.
We're pretty prescriptive in terms of what type of data we want collected. There's lots of different types of measurement that we don't even touch in a school system. So we often talk about collecting antecedent behavior consequence, so ABC data, only to just determine the function of behavior. And then we really throw that out, because once we have the function, we don't need to be collecting that anymore. We don't need to keep that for a period of time. That's not going to help a student access, extra support at all through our department. But what we usually move to is having a good baseline measure of usually the frequency, which we can convert to rate, and then making sure that we continue to collect frequency converted to rate once we implement our intervention. So we've kind of moved from an intensive ABC data to just simple kind of frequency data to make sure that our interventions are working.
And our level 3 would be where you can come to find out more about frequency, rate, and duration data, which is, I think, what we go into the most in level 3. Yeah, because those are the ones we really use most in the school system. There's lots of other types of data, but often they're really time intensive and onerous, and it's just not possible to take that type of data in this setting.
Okay.
No, that's funny. I'm talking ahead of
There you go.
So ABA is a tool in your toolbox. Fiction. Definitely.
This is a hard one.
Fiction.
In the context, yeah, that's a hard one.
Because I guess it's not clearly a tool in your toolbox, because we think of using ABA, when we need to. So the way we think of it is why it's fiction is because applied behavior analysis, again, is an entire science that's evidence-based and very data-driven. So it's hard for us just to kind of pick and choose when we're going to use applied behavior analysis, because when we're working with students, again, if we go back to our wheel, which I think we just need to always have a visual of the wheel.
The wheel.
Talk about
everyone knows
this.
We'll make sure that we post the wheel in addition to the BACB site so that you know what I'm referring to. is that it's not just a tool, it's actually a very rigorous methodology that we're going to use with a whole set of kind of procedures that we're going to follow.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've been in contact with parents who are very aware of that whole strategy, that whole wheel that we're talking about, and they will know what parts of ABA are being used and not used. So we are trying to kind of disseminate the information that ABA is a science and a whole cycle of things versus just one strategy here and there.
And that it's okay that you need help to do ABA.
Yes.
You should need help to do ABA, because all of us need help to do ABA. We
still
collaborate
need
a lot.
Yeah.
Almost every day.
Yeah.
By a tool, I guess, too, is we think, or we might write in a student's IEP, the use of positive reinforcement, which is awesome, which is what PPM 140 tells us that we need to do. So then we think, okay, well, I'm using positive reinforcement for my student within the classroom, therefore I'm using applied behavior analysis. And we would just like to caution in that kind of line of thinking, because the way we might use positive reinforcement is we specifically evaluated what type of positive reinforcement, what type of reinforcer is going to work for that student. And then we're really monitoring through the use of data collection to see if that's effective or not. So we're always tying it back to one strategy that was born from applied behavior analysis. We can't just say that we're using ABA if we're using one particular strategy or principle, because we have to tie it back to that whole wheel, the whole applied behavior analysis cycle.
Yeah. And
we're making a database decision. Again, positive reinforcement is only an evidence-based practice if it's used in an evidence-based way. So how frequently are you delivering that reinforcement? Was it based on baseline data of how frequently the student needs it? What is your reinforcer? Is it functioning as a reinforcer? Is it actually increasing future behavior, or is it having no to little impact or decreasing future behavior? That would be not a reinforcer. And there's a whole collection of data that we take sort of in our functional behavior assessment process, depending on the student and depending on the situation, to lead us down the path of what are we going to do for a reinforcer and how are we going to deliver it. And then, of course, what makes sense for the school team and what can they manage in the classroom. So, yeah, it's only evidence-based if it's used in an evidence-based way.
And if you need help with that, because it is pretty tricky, you can reach out to us to ask us questions. At any point, as the ABA lead for the board, I can help point you in the right direction if you need more information or who to contact, or I can simply give you some of the answers to the best of my knowledge. So you have a team, you have a special education and student services team that can help you, and we certainly want to do that.
Okay. The next one for the fact and fiction is applied behavior analysis focuses on compliance using positive reinforcement. This I also found was interesting in the contest. There's a good mix of fact and fiction here. But guess what? It's fiction. So this is one of the myths that we commonly encounter, I think, in our science, is that people really do feel like we are compliance driven. Like when we say something, we want the student to comply with the instruction. And so part of that myth comes from the terminology that we use. We do use words like demand or instruction and compliance, and it makes it sound so robotic and official and cold. But really what we mean is we want in the A column, if something is asked of the student, we want the behavior to be evoked and then it to be reinforced to continue to happen. So if in order to get that cycle flowing, we do need to speak in, in ways that we can control that behavior. We can make it happen or make it not happen. And so we don't just focus on compliance through positive reinforcement. I think part of that myth also comes from in the 60s when the early research was coming out of applied behavior analysis. You would see a lot more literature than there is now about compliance programs, compliance training programs. And we do still use a lot of that methodology. We just don't call it that anymore. And we've moved away, and it's kind of grown quite a bit in terms of what it looks like and how it runs. We don't want students ever to comply just for the sake of compliance, right? That's not what ABA focuses on. So sometimes that's viewed as sort of the pinnacle of what we try to do, and it's not correct. We do not focus mainly on compliance through positive reinforcement. We focus on a very comprehensive look at the student, what their skill deficits are, what their skills are, and how we're going to use those things to help us impact behavior through manipulation of environmental variables. So yeah, it's not just about compliance.
And if you've ever worked with us, I would say that most of our plans have some form of communication in it. And so our main reason for putting that form of communication is so that they can communicate their wants and needs, and that we can deliver that when they need it. So we're not simply training just compliance, we're training them to be able to say, actually, I don't want to do this right now, and that's okay. Maybe we can give them a little break, maybe we can wait a little bit and then we can get back to it, because I mean, there is a certain amount of work that would need to be completed depending on the situation. But our main goal is always to allow the student to have that voice so that they can communicate their wants and needs. So we don't want to train them simply to listen to us. So children must undergo 40 hours of ABA therapy a week to achieve a positive effect if under 6. Fiction. So I was just waiting for it to pop up. Fiction. So fiction. So although it's been in the media a lot lately about, what type of hours children need and all that, what the biggest take-home message here is that it's individualized. Every child needs a certain amount of hours of therapy, if they require therapy at all, based on their individual assessment and needs. So someone like Becky would do a psychological assessment on them, and that would help determine what their skill deficits are, where their strengths are, and what hours they would need in order to achieve this level of skill acquisition or whatever their focus is. I mean, it's always skill acquisition, but whatever specific skills there is. So there's no hard number of 40, 30, 25. It's individualized. And so the thing we want you to really take home from here is it's individualized. Every student needs their own set of hours based on their own assessment. There's no specific magic number.
And what we mean by ABA therapy, this is also sort of a huge myth that I find is common, especially in the school system, is people say, well, we don't do therapy here. What ABA is you can be employing it on different levels. So you can do focused applied behavior analysis, which is the bulk of our work. We come in, there's one specific behavior that we are decreasing, there's specific skill acquisition we're putting in its place as a functionally equivalent replacement behavior. We're working with the school team to focus directly on that. There's something else called comprehensive applied behavior analysis, which is what happens in therapeutic settings like
you might have heard IBI or something.
Yeah, they used to be called IBI, intensive behavioral intervention. So in comprehensive ABA, all domains of that student's day is approached through the lens of applied behavior analysis. All problem behaviors are being reduced and all skills are being implemented at the same time. So what used to be thought of as sort of IBI, like sitting at a table, discrete trial, everything's a discrete trial lesson, and it's repetitive. That's only a small component of those therapeutic settings. Mostly it's from the moment they walk in the door, from greetings to dressing to everything is written in applied behavior analysis. Every single one of those skills goes through the entire wheel. And everything is very, very prescribed. So from the way they run their circle time to the way they run their music lesson to the way the student is taught to put on their shoes, it's so comprehensive. So of course, many students benefit from that type of intensive teaching because it's so specific and it hits across so many domains. But we in our school system are currently focusing on focused ABA. So what is the main behavior that needs to be reduced? What is the main skill that needs to be replaced? And let's get on the same page and let's do that, because we know that this is not a therapeutic setting where we can do comprehensive ABA. So sometimes that's where the confusion comes from too, I find, is 40 hours a week, like, oh my God, we can't do that. Well, no, of course we can. And that's not the goal. That's not our mandate. And that's why, those therapeutic environments are doing what they're doing with students. They're doing a comprehensive approach. Well, and I want to say too, a lot of them are doing focused approaches. It very much depends on the student. Yeah. So some students are going to those for just social skills programming or just other sort of skill deficit instruction. So they do focused and comprehensive ABA for sure.
Yeah. So individualized, take that home.
Yeah, individualized. It depends on your student.
So Pecs, Picture Exchange Communication System, was developed by an SLP and behavior analyst.
Dun, dun, dun. Let's see.
Fact. Definitely fact. So Pecs was developed by Andy Bondi and
Lori Frost.
Lori Frost. So Lori is an SLP and Andy is a BCBA and a PhD in, is he psych?
I think so.
He's a BCBAD.
Yeah.
So that's what we tend to go towards Pecs a lot because there's a lot of evidence behind this augmentative communication system. And it was developed by, so we have the best of both worlds, a speech and language pathologist, as well as someone that really understands how behavior is learned, particularly for kids with autism or other communication impairments. Yeah.
The cool thing about Pecs is that not only does it have a huge amount of research with, like you said, with a variety of different learners, it's the only communication approach other than verbal communication where it takes a very prescribed, strict ABA approach to how we're measuring that student's learning, when we're moving that student from this type of system to a device, what are the prerequisites for different phases of Pecs. And it's also the only communicative approach that at phase 1 of Pecs requires 0 prerequisite skills. So literally any learner at any level, regardless of, it does not require prerequisite skills because of the way that phase 1 is taught. So that's a very, very unique thing about Pecs, which we love because, you can take any learner and teach them phase 1 of Pecs. Only phase 2 through phase 6 have prerequisites, but phase 1 is the prerequisite for phase 2 because it teaches so many skills while you're teaching that communication. So,
and just a little quick reminder while we're here is remembering that Pecs is a communication system and it's not a visual schedule. It's not a picture that you're using for your child.
Not a choice board.
Yeah, so just a quick reminder on that. There also is training coming up in Kingston. So if you're interested, there's Pecs level 1 training coming up and it's on in June, 18th and 19th, I believe. It's the, if you go to the Pecs Canada website, you can find it there if you're interested in more Pecs training, or if you have parents who might be interested in that as well.
Yeah. I also want to say there's a Facebook page called Pecs User Support. And once a month, Andy Bondi and Lori Frost do a live webinar like this right on the Facebook page, and it's beautiful. And every month, there's new people in charge of moderating the Facebook page. So it might be the Pecs Brazil lead or the Pecs Canada lead or the Pecs France lead. And so it's really, really interesting. People will post different videos on there of Pecs use with different learners and questions and answers and things. So that's always a really good resource I find to keep learning.
Yeah.
Okay, so next one for fact or fiction, applied behavior analysis focuses on antecedent strategies and skill acquisition.
Yay, super impressed. I think everyone got this. So like, yay.
That means we're really bringing it home in training, which is really, really good along the Google Plus community, which is awesome. So basically, a lot of people assume, and this is a huge myth, of course, is that ABA focuses on challenging behavior reduction. We go in, we reduce behavior, and we're gone. We only want to be called if your student is having big major blow-ups. That's not true. Most of the research in ABA actually focuses on how we prevent all those behaviors so that we don't have to be called in afterward to put out the fire, and how we teach that student the skills, the better ways to get those functions met, basically. We focus a lot on skill acquisition. So a lot of times, I really need to look up what her name is, but she's one of our professors in our most recent BCBA course. But she has learning centers all across the United States, and they do not focus on challenging behavior. They do not focus on autism. They focus on neurotypical students using ABA to increase their math skills, increase their reading skills.
It's like tutoring.
It's like a tutoring center, and it's so fascinating. So she goes through a variety, in one of our courses, goes through a variety of research and how they graph and they compare their research, and in terms of using ABA as a teaching methodology, and when traditional methodologies aren't working with neurotypical students. So it's really, really fascinating. I'll find her name, and I'm sure she's got YouTube clips or website or something that is attached to her. But yeah, she focuses only on skill acquisition, which is great.
And that's what they can probably do more in IBI. And we would love to be able to do that within the school system too. That would be our primary job, is just helping educators just on skill acquisition and teaching with ABA. But unfortunately, because the demands of students who are engaging in problem behavior, we have to take that focused ABA approach where us and the behavior consultants are only called in if there's significant challenging behavior. So there always, for us, is a behavior reduction component, but there should be a skill acquisition component too. And we always have this conversation about, so when do we let go of these students? So we always kind of make goals, which are usually behavior reduction goals, and a skill acquisition goal of the functional equivalent behavior, replacement behavior. But then we always want to kind of hold on to these students because we know that there's so much other skills that we could help teach. But it's usually on to the next student.
Oh, sorry about that.
Good morning.
I know, right? Jen and I had a little bit of an advantage this year of being able to work in the assessment classes and do some more skill acquisition because we were involved in more of an antecedent level of, hey, we're here. Yeah. Sometimes problem behaviors weren't occurring yet, so we were able to help with skill acquisition there, and that was amazing. And we also recognized that it was not something that we can always achieve, so we were really excited to do that this year as well.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to take the second one?
All right, so the main focus of ABA is to help individuals achieve a meaningful outcome. Yes, this is our whole goal. Okay. There's someone knocking on the door. Sorry, we're just checking who is here at the door. So the main goal is to work on socially significant goals that are going to help them achieve the outcome that is best for them in the future. So depending on the learner and their skills, we are working on the skills that will help them to achieve what's best for them at that moment. So whether they're working to move towards, independent skills, so toileting, communication skills is always one of our big go-tos, dressing independently, anything that can allow them to be more independent in their lives. And that's a better outcome for them than needing assistance full time. So we're always looking at what skills can we teach that will allow them to be independent and, their best outcome for them. We also have we talked about this in my last training, a 5-year rule. So we're always looking 5 years ahead of where do we want them to be in about 5 years, and where that is, what skills will they need, and how will we work backwards to teach all those skills that's needed for them to achieve that goal in, say, 5 years. Yes, achieve them now. Because we know that it's going to take time to teach these skills. We know that there might be multiple skills, and all of these skills have prerequisites. So we know that we have kind of a path to follow, and that it could take us several years to teach all of the skills needed to get there. So we're kind of planning backwards all the time and looking for that. Also, again, it's individualized, right? Like that's the whole point of ABA. And I mean, as your IEP goals are individualized as well, of course, individualized, is that we are focusing on what this child's best outcome is, not what another child is or what someone else is doing in their grade. It's for them what their best outcome is.
And that's why we use multiple assessments that are not norm referenced. So the ABLES, we assess ABLES comparatively to where your student was at 6 months ago and where they're at now, and we use that to measure your student against themselves. So that's where we get meaningful outcomes. We're not as interested in the comparison between your student and the other typical grade 3s in the class. We're interested in your student, what the next skill is to get him toward, his most meaningful outcome. And I think that's not always the same in terms of a meaningful outcome for your student is not always, a parent's goal, number one priority, or an educator's number one priority. But we really do have to focus ethically on what's most meaningful for the student. And how does that fit within the framework of what everyone else wants for the student, right? And so we use very specific assessment tools to get our student along that path. And you were saying like it's all a pathway, and that's what we use to guide that is those type of assessments, the APPLES or the ABLES, and really just data-based decision making. So even if you're not using a formal tool like that, using data to show like, are we getting our student closer to that goal or not? So this was a fact. So this is our last slide. We really want to say thank you because so many people participated in the Fact or Fiction contest. It was really awesome. The Google Home Mini will be very well enjoyed, I'm sure, by Crystal Cook. I don't know who Crystal Cook is. Do either of you know her?
I'm bad with names. So I feel like I've probably
heard.
I forget. I don't know the face to the name. I feel like if I saw
I'm
the
sure I
name.
would. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
If I know who they are. So hopefully she will enjoy
It's in the
that.
pony today.
Yay. Yeah. So I think we have one more webinar next month.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the month, because you're gonna have nothing to do at the end of June. You're not gonna
In
be
case
busy
you're
at
bored
all.
for the summer, we'll give you a few.
Is that social skills?
Yes.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
so.
And I think we
Jump
targeted social skills for January, hoping that maybe that some skills could be implemented in the summer, possibly with parents if they were started then. So.
Yeah.
During the camp.
Yeah.
So we'll post this link on the Google Plus community, and if you have questions or comments, please feel free to comment under the link, and of course we'll respond to those. And hopefully the Fact or Fiction contest was fun for you and engaging. So many people participated, so thanks again for that.
And if you have any other ideas or videos or webinars, shoot us an email because we love ideas. Plus, it like saves us some work of having to think of them ourselves.
Yeah, we don't know what you want at this point. We do. I did hear the feedback recently.
We don't know what you want.
We don't know what you want. We have to have an assessment. I did hear feedback recently that there's so much on the community right now that better organizing would be,
Yes,
would
I
be
agree
good.
with
And
that.
I agree too.
And I'm an
'cause
organizer, and it's not good.
So we will definitely, put different headings on the left-hand side, Pecs and
They're there. They're just not in them.
Yeah, we have to.
We'll have to
we have to do
organize
that.
a little bit.
So that'll be on our to-do list this summer.
So remember too, you guys can be reviewing all of these webinars, throughout the summer to keep up with your summer learning. And I know a lot of schools try to watch these at the during bits and pieces during a staff meeting or at the onset of their day. So
Bring us to the beach with you on your phone. You can bring up the Google Plus app, and we'll hang out with you. Have a margarita while you watch us talk about.
they'll
ABA.
be thinking about ABA and how to teach it all summer. So
We will.
Yeah. Anyway, so thank you again for coming today, and we will post it and post any questions below.
Bye.
Bye.